Some acts of cruelty don't announce themselves with violence. They arrive quietly, wrapped in the language of justice, carried out by men who believe they're doing right. The woman sat in the center of the square, with a burlap sack pulled tight over her head, thick rope binding her wrists behind her back. The crowd watched from the wooden walkway, arms crossed, faces hard. They called her the Beast, said she'd been stealing cattle for months, living wild in the hills like an animal. But no one had actually seen her face in years. The sack had been Garrett Stone's idea, said it was for everyone's protection, that looking at her might bring bad fortune. The truth was simpler and uglier. They wanted to strip away the last piece of her humanity. When Dalton Reed rode into town that morning, he had no intention of getting involved in anyone's trouble. He'd come looking for work, nothing more. But when he saw her sitting there in the dust, ropes cutting into her arms, sack rising and falling with each labored breath, something broke open inside him. The square smelled of horses and dry earth. Dalton dismounted slowly, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud that seemed too loud in the heavy silence. Kiona didn't move. She couldn't see him approach, couldn't see anything through the rough weave of burlap that scraped against her face with every breath. She'd stopped struggling an hour ago, stopped making any sound at all. The men who dragged her here had enjoyed that other silence. They took it as proof of guilt, evidence of the animal nature they'd always suspected. Garrett Stone stood near the saloon entrance, thumbs hooked in his belt, watching his handiwork with satisfaction. He was a thick man with graying hair and hands that had built half the structures in this settlement. People listened when Garrett spoke, trusted him. That trust had made him bold. Dalton moved through the crowd like water finding a crack in stone. Nobody stopped him. Nobody spoke. They were too busy watching the spectacle, waiting to see what would happen next. Some had brought their children. When he reached Kiona, Dalton knelt in the dirt beside her. Up close, he could see how tightly they'd secured the sack drawn so tight around her neck that red marks showed on her skin where the fabric met flesh. The ropes around her wrists had been tied by someone who knew their work. Professional, meant to hold. He reached for the edge of the sack. Her whole body went rigid. Through the burlap, he heard the sharp intake of breath, the kind that comes before a scream or a fight, but she did neither, just sat there, trembling slightly, waiting to see what new torment this stranger had planned. Dalton's fingers found the knot at the base of her skull. It was tight, tied with the kind of precision that spoke of deliberate cruelty. As he worked at it, he felt the weight of every eye in that square pressing against his back, felt the shift in the air, the way silence can turn from passive to dangerous. Garrett's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and certain. That woman is a thief and a danger. You got no business interfering. Dalton didn't look up, didn't stop working at the knot. His voice when it came was low, steady, the kind of quiet that makes people lean in to hear. I got business with cruelty wherever I find it. The knot came loose. The sack stayed in place for a moment, held by sweat and pressure. Before Dalton pulled it away, what he saw underneath stopped his breath. Not a beast, not a monster, just a woman with dark eyes wide with fear and confusion, black hair plastered to her forehead, and a face that had seen too much pain to trust kindness when it appeared. Kiona looked at him, really looked, saw a stranger with worn clothes and careful hands, saw someone who'd chosen to kneel in the dirt beside her when the rest of the world had been content to watch her suffer. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe, or just the shared understanding of what it means to be alone in a place that wants you gone. Garrett moved first. His boots struck the wooden walkway in quick succession as he descended into the square, 3 of his men following close behind. The circle that had been loose and observational suddenly became tight and threatening. Dalton rose to his feet, positioning himself between Kiona and the approaching men. His hand didn't move toward the old revolver on his hip knot yet, but the possibility hung in the air like smoke. "Step aside," Garrett said. "This ain't your concern." Dalton's jaw tightened. Behind him, he could hear Kiona's breathing, fast and shallow, could feel her trying to stand despite the rope still binding her wrists. He'd removed the sack from her head. That was all. But somehow it felt like he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, made a choice that would define everything that came after. The question was simple: walk away or see this through. And Dalton Reed had spent too many years running from moments like this one. His sister's face flashed in his memory, another time he'd stood by while others decided someone's fate. He wouldn't make that mistake again. But what Dalton didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the real thief was standing in that crowd right now, watching with satisfaction, as his crime was blamed on the woman who'd had the misfortune of being different. And when the truth finally came out, it would cost more than anyone in that square was prepared to pay. Garrett stopped 3 feet from Dalton, close enough to make his point, far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. The men behind him fanned out slightly, hands resting on their belts near where holsters hung. Nobody drew. Not yet, but the promise of violence saturated the air like humidity before a storm. "You don't know what you're doing," Garrett said. His voice carried the weight of authority earned through years of building this settlement from empty land. "That woman has been stealing from us for months. 15 head of cattle gone from my ranch alone. Jenkins lost 8. The Morrows lost 6 plus 2 horses." Dalton kept his eyes on Garrett, but his awareness extended to every man in that circle. He'd learned long ago to track multiple threats at once. "You see her take them? Don't need to see it. She's the only one living up in those hills. Cattle don't just wander off on their own." Garrett gestured toward Kiona without looking at her. "She's Apache. They're raiders by nature. Everyone knows it." Behind Dalton, Kiona finally found her voice. It came out rough, like something long unused. "I took nothing from you." Garrett's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Of course you'd say that. You people always lie when you're caught." Dalton felt Kiona tense behind him, felt the surge of anger that wanted to become words, become action, but she held it, channeled it into silence. That control told him something important about her, told him she'd survived worse than this. "Untie her hands," Dalton said quietly. "Not a chance." Garrett crossed his arms. "She's going to answer for what she's done. We're civilized people here. We follow the law." "What law?" Dalton's voice stayed level, but something cold moved through the words. "The law that says you can put a sack over someone's head and parade them through town without trial?" "That law?" Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Not agreement exactly, but uncertainty. The kind that appears when people realize they might have been complicit in something uglier than they'd admitted to themselves. Garrett's jaw tightened. "We caught her near the north pasture 2 days ago, right where the cattle went missing. She had blood on her clothes. From butchering," Kiona said. "A deer I hunted, not your cattle." "Convenient story." Garrett turned to address the crowd, playing to them now. "She lives like an animal up there. No farm, no honest work. How else does she survive if not by taking what belongs to others?" Dalton watched the crowd's faces, saw how easily they accepted Garrett's logic, saw how fear and prejudice could dress themselves up as reason, but he also saw something else. In the back, a younger man shifted his weight nervously. His eyes wouldn't settle anywhere, kept darting between Garrett and the ground. His hands fidgeted with his belt. "Who found the cattle missing first?" Dalton asked. "I did," Garrett said. 3 weeks back. Checked the herd and came up short." "And when exactly did you see Kiona near the pasture?" 2 days ago. Like I said, we'd been watching for whoever was taking them." Dalton's eyes narrowed slightly. Something in the timing didn't sit right. But before he could press further, Jenkins stepped forward from the crowd. He was a wiry man with sun-damaged skin and eyes that had seen too many hard seasons. "Look, stranger, we appreciate you having a conscience and all, but you don't live here. You don't know how things have been." Jenkins glanced at Kiona with something that might have been pity or might have been disgust. Hard to tell which. "She's been trouble since she showed up 3 years ago. Keeps to herself, won't talk to anyone, won't come to town. That's not natural." "Being alone isn't a crime," Dalton said. "No." Garrett's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "But stealing is, and you're defending a thief. That makes you complicit. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to step aside, get on your horse, and ride out. Forget you saw any of this, or you're going to find yourself in more trouble than you can handle." Dalton didn't move. The sun beat down on his shoulders. Sweat traced a line down his spine. Every instinct he'd honed over years of surviving told him to do exactly what Garrett suggested. Walk away. This wasn't his town, wasn't his problem, but those instincts had failed him before. When his sister needed someone to stand up for her, those same instincts had told him not to interfere in family business that wasn't his to judge. He'd listened to them then. She died because of it. "No," Dalton said simply. Garrett's face went hard. He nodded to the men behind him. They moved forward as one, hands now hovering over their weapons. The crowd pulled back, giving them room, giving them permission. But before anyone could draw, A shout came from the far end of the square. Everyone turned. A rider was coming in fast, horse lathered and breathing hard. He pulled up in a spray of dust and dismounted in one motion. "Garrett!" The rider was breathing almost as hard as his horse. "The North Pasture. You need to see this right now." "What is it?" The rider's eyes cut to Kiona, then back to Garrett. "The cattle. We found them." The silence that followed those words stretched thin as wire. Garrett's face went through several expressions at once: confusion, relief, then something darker that vanished too quickly to name. "Where?" he demanded. "Box Canyon, 2 miles past the ridge. All of them. Penned in with brush and rope." The rider wiped sweat from his forehead. "They're thirsty and hungry but alive." The crowd erupted in conversation. People talking over each other, asking questions, expressing relief. In the chaos, Dalton watched Garrett carefully, watched how the man's eyes went to that nervous younger man in the back, held there for just a moment, then cut away. Watched how his jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't spit out. "Well," Dalton said into the noise, "seems like the cattle weren't stolen after all. Just moved. Or she moved them there to hide them," Garrett countered quickly. Too quickly. "Planned to come back and sell them when things cooled down." Kiona made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. "I live alone in the hills. Who would I sell them to? And with what? You think I have a wagon? A team to pull one?" Her logic was sound. Dalton could see others in the crowd starting to recognize it too. The certainty that had held them together was beginning to crack. Jenkins looked uncomfortable now. The woman who'd brought her children pulled them closer, as if ashamed they'd seen this. "Untie her," Dalton said again. This time it wasn't a request. Garrett opened his mouth to argue, but the moment had shifted. The righteous anger that had fueled this public spectacle was leaking away, replaced by something more dangerous: doubt. Doubt made people defensive, made them look for someone to blame. "Fine," Garrett gestured sharply to one of his men. "Cut her loose. But this doesn't mean she's innocent. It just means we need to look harder at what she's been doing up there." The man moved behind Kiona and sliced through the ropes binding her wrists. She brought her hands forward slowly, wincing as circulation returned in painful pins and needles. Her wrists were raw where the rope had cut into skin. Dalton saw her glance at him, something complicated moving behind those dark eyes. Not gratitude exactly, more like assessment, trying to understand why he'd done what he'd done. The crowd began to disperse, people drifting back to their interrupted day, already rewriting what they'd witnessed into something more comfortable, something that didn't require them to examine their own cruelty. But Garrett didn't move. He stood watching Kiona with an expression that promised this wasn't over. "You should leave," he said. Not to Dalton. To her. "Leave these hills. Go back to wherever your people ended up. There's nothing for you here but trouble." Kiona met his eyes steadily. "My people are dead. This is my home now. I have as much right to be here as you." "Rights." Garrett's voice dripped contempt. "You people lost your rights when you lost the land. You're here because we allow it. Remember that." He turned and walked away, his men following. But that nervous young man lingered, eyes still on Kiona with something that looked like guilt, or maybe fear. Then he too turned and disappeared into the dispersing crowd. Dalton waited until they were mostly alone before he spoke. "You have somewhere safe to go? I've been safe for 3 years without your help." Kiona rubbed her wrists gingerly. "Why did you do that? Interfere? Seemed like the right thing." The right thing. She studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. People don't do the right thing. They do what benefits them. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. Everyone wants something." She took a step back, creating distance. "Thank you for removing the sack, but I don't need rescue. I don't need protection, and I definitely don't need pity." She turned to leave. Dalton almost let her go. Almost. But something made him reach out, fingers closing gently around her forearm. She went rigid at the touch, every muscle tensing like a trapped animal about to fight. "Those cattle didn't pen themselves," Dalton said quietly. "Someone put them there. Someone who wanted you blamed. And whoever it was, they're still out there." Kiona pulled her arm free, but didn't walk away. "Why do you care?" Before Dalton could answer, a rock sailed through the air and struck Kiona's shoulder. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to hurt. They both turned. 3 boys stood at the edge of the square, maybe 12 or 13 years old, the kind of age where cruelty comes easy and consequences seem distant. "Beast," one of them shouted. Go back to your cave. Another rock flew. This one Kiona caught mid-air with reflexes that spoke of years defending herself. She threw it back, not at the boys but at their feet. They scattered, laughing. The sound of it, that casual, thoughtless laughter, was somehow worse than the rocks. Kiona's face had gone carefully blank. "This is why I live alone," she said. "This is why I stay in the hills. Because even when they know I'm innocent, even when the truth is right in front of them, they'll still see a beast." She walked away then, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. Dalton watched her go, watched the way she held herself, spine straight, head up, refusing to show them any weakness. But he'd seen her eyes before she turned away, seen the hurt there that no amount of pride could quite hide. And he'd seen something else too. That nervous young man was following her, keeping his distance, but definitely following. His hand rested on the knife at his belt. Whatever business he had with Kiona, it wasn't finished. Dalton didn't think. He just moved. Years of instinct took over as he followed the young man who was following Kiona. The stranger stayed well back, using buildings and wagons for cover, clearly inexperienced at tracking but determined enough to try. Kiona had already left the main settlement behind, heading toward the rocky hills that rose like broken teeth against the horizon. She walked with purpose, not looking back, as if she'd long ago accepted that people would watch her leave with relief. The young man Dalton had heard someone call him Curtis earlier picked up his pace. His hand stayed on that knife. Whatever he planned to do, he wanted to do it away from witnesses. Dalton closed the distance between them carefully. The land here was open scrub and scattered stones, offering little concealment. But Curtis was focused entirely on Kiona, tunnel vision that comes from fear or guilt, or both. They were maybe a quarter mile from town when Curtis made his move. He broke into a jog, closing the gap quickly. "Hey!" he called out. "You need to stop!" Kiona turned, and Dalton saw her body shift immediately into a defensive stance. Not aggressive, but ready. She'd clearly had to defend herself before. "Leave me alone," she said. Her voice carried clearly across the distance. "I can't." Curtis stopped about 10 feet from her, breathing hard. Not from exertion, from nerves. "You need to leave. Tonight. Don't come back." "Why?" Kiona's eyes narrowed. "Why do you care where I go?" Curtis glanced back toward town, like he was checking to see if anyone had followed. He didn't see Dalton, who'd dropped into a crouch behind a cluster of rocks. "Because if you don't leave, something bad is going to happen to you. Worse than today." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." Curtis took a step closer. His hand tightened on the knife handle. "Please, just go. Take whatever you need and run. Go north, go south, I don't care. Just get out of this territory." Kiona studied him with that same intense focus she'd turned on Dalton earlier. "You know something." "About the cattle." Curtis flinched like she'd struck him. "I don't know anything." "You're lying." She took a step toward him instead of away. "You were there, in the canyon. You helped pen them." "No." But his voice cracked on the word. "No, I didn't. You're wrong." "Then why are you here? Why warn me?" Kiona moved closer still. "Why do you look like you haven't slept since those cattle were found?" Curtis pulled the knife, not in a threatening way, more like he needed something to hold on to. His hand shook. "You don't understand. If you stay, if you keep asking questions, Garrett will." He stopped, caught himself, but he'd already said enough. Dalton rose from behind the rocks. "Garrett will what?" Curtis spun around, knife raised. When he saw Dalton, the blood drained from his face. "You. Why are you following me?" "Same reason you're following her, except I'm not carrying a knife." Dalton walked forward slowly, hands visible and empty. "What's Garrett gonna do, Curtis?" "How do you know my name?" "Heard someone say it. Small town. People talk." Dalton stopped a few feet away. "Now answer the question. What's Garrett planning?" Curtis looked between them, trapped. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I can't. If I say anything, my family depends on him. My father works his ranch. If I cross Garrett, we'll lose everything. And if Kiona dies because you stayed silent?" Dalton let that question hang in the air. "You'll carry that the rest of your life. Trust me, that weight doesn't get lighter with time." Something in Dalton's voice must have reached Curtis because the young man's shoulders sagged. The knife lowered slightly. "I didn't want any of this. I just needed money. Garrett offered me $50 to move the cattle. Said it was just a joke, a way to make the Apache woman look bad so she'd leave on her own. Said nobody would get hurt. But someone is going to get hurt, Kiona said quietly. Aren't they? Curtis nodded miserably. Garrett's been losing money. Bad investments back east. He owes people. Dangerous people. When the cattle turned up too soon before he could sell them, he got desperate. He told me this morning that if you don't leave or if anyone starts asking too many questions, he'll make sure you have an accident. Make it look like you fell from the rocks or got attacked by a wild animal. The words settled over them like ash. Dalton felt rage building in his chest, the kind that makes hands shake and vision narrow. Why tell us this now? Because I'm not a killer. Curtis wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm just a stupid kid who made a stupid choice. But I won't be part of someone dying. I won't. Then you need to testify, Dalton said. Tell people what Garrett did. They won't believe me over him. He built half this town. My word against his? Curtis laughed bitterly. I'll end up in worse trouble than her. Maybe. Dalton glanced at Kiona, saw her watching him with something that might have been respect. But staying silent guarantees she ends up dead, and you end up living with that knowledge. So you need to decide who you want to be. Curtis, right now. The young man stood there, knife hanging loose in his hand, face twisted with conflict. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll talk, but we need proof. Something more than just my word. What kind of proof? Kiona asked. Curtis thought for a moment. There's a ledger in Garrett's office at the ranch. Shows the real accounts, not the ones he lets people see. Shows how much he's lost, how desperate he is. If we can get that, then we have leverage, Dalton finished. But his ranch is guarded at night, 3 men at least, and Garrett himself sleeps in the main house. Curtis shook his head. Getting in there without being seen would be nearly impossible. Kiona's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Nearly impossible is different from impossible, and I know every inch of this territory, including ways onto that ranch that Garrett's men don't watch. Dalton looked at her. You're thinking of going there? Tonight? I'm thinking, she said, that I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. If Curtis is willing to help expose the truth, then I'm willing to get that ledger. It's too dangerous. Everything about my life is dangerous. Kiona met his eyes. You saved me from one kind of death today. Are you willing to help me fight another? They made their plans in Kiona's camp. It wasn't much lean-to built against a rock face, a small fire pit, and a few belongings that could be packed and carried in minutes. The kind of place someone builds when they expect to run at any moment. Dalton noticed how little she had. A blanket, a cooking pot, a knife, some dried meat hanging from a rope. This was how she'd lived for 3 years. Always ready to flee, never settling in enough to call it home. Curtis had gone back to town to avoid suspicion. They'd meet him after dark near the northern approach to Garrett's ranch. That gave them a few hours to prepare, and a few hours for Dalton to wonder what he'd gotten himself into. You don't have to do this, Kiona said. She was sharpening her knife on a flat stone, the rhythmic sound filling the silence between them. This is my fight, not yours. Seems like it became my fight the moment I took that sack off your head. Dalton sat across the fire from her, watching the way the flames cast shadows across her face. Besides, Curtis isn't wrong. You go in alone even with his help and something goes wrong, you'll be the one they blame. They blame me for everything already. What difference does one more thing make? The difference between surviving and not surviving. Dalton leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You asked me why I interfered today, why I helped you. Kiona stopped sharpening, waited. I had a sister, younger. She got involved with a man who wasn't good to her. Everyone could see at the bruises she tried to hide, the way she flinched when he raised his voice. But it was family business, people said. Not our place to interfere. Dalton's voice went quiet. I told myself the same thing. Stayed out of it. Figured she'd leave him when she was ready. But she didn't. No, she stayed. And one night, he went too far. Dalton looked into the fire instead of at Kiona. By the time I stopped pretending it wasn't my business, it was too late. So when I saw you today, sitting there with that sack over your head while everyone stood by and watched, I couldn't do nothing. Not again. Kiona set the knife down carefully. I'm sorry about your sister. So am I. Dalton met her eyes across the flames. But being sorry doesn't bring her back, doesn't change what I didn't do. All I can do now is try not to make the same mistake twice. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Kiona spoke, her voice carrying a weight that came from holding words in too long. My tribe was camped near a river. The soldiers came at dawn. Said we'd violated treaty terms, crossed into territory we weren't allowed in anymore. Most of us were still sleeping. She paused, swallowed. They gave us 10 minutes to gather what we could carry. Anyone who argued or moved too slow, they shot them. My husband tried to protect our daughter. They killed him first. Then her. Dalton felt something crack open in his chest. How did you survive? I ran. Like a coward. Kiona's hands clenched into fists. I heard my daughter screaming for me, and I ran into the woods and hid like an animal. When I finally came back, everyone was dead or gone. I buried what was left. Then I came here, to these empty hills where nobody wanted to be, and I've been hiding ever since. That's not cowardice. That's survival. Is there a difference? Kiona looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Every day I'm alive, I think about them. About how I should have stayed. Should have fought. You'd be dead too. At least I'd be with them. Dalton understood that feeling. The guilt that came from surviving when others didn't. The constant question of whether living was worth the weight of carrying their memory. Your people didn't die so you could waste your life wishing you'd died with them, he said. They died hoping you'd live. Hoping you'd carry something of them forward. What's there to carry forward? Kiona gestured at the bare camp around them. I have nothing. I am nothing. Just the beast they think I am. No. Dalton stood and walked around the fire to where she sat. Knelt down so they were eye level. You're a woman who survived something that would have broken most people. Who kept going when it would have been easier to give up. Who just agreed to risk her life to expose the truth, even though it would be safer to run. He hesitated, then reached out and gently touched her scarred wrist where the ropes had cut into her. That's not nothing. That's not a beast. That's someone worth fighting for. Kiona stared at him. Something shifted in her expression. The careful walls she'd built around herself developing the first hairline cracks. You don't even know me. I know enough. Dalton's hand lingered on her wrist. Felt her pulse beating fast beneath his fingers. I know you deserve better than what this world has given you. And I know that if we're doing this thing tonight, I'd rather do it with you than anyone else. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither could quite name. Then Kiona pulled her hand back slowly, not rejecting the touch, but protecting herself from the hope it represented. We should go, she said, before I lose my nerve. You won't. How do you know? Dalton stood and offered his hand to help her up. Because people who lose their nerve don't survive 3 years alone in hostile territory. And they definitely don't offer to break into a guarded ranch to steal evidence from a dangerous man. Kiona took his hand, let him pull her to her feet, stood there for a moment, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin. If we die tonight, she said quietly, at least I won't die alone. We're not going to die. You can't promise that. No, Dalton admitted, but I can promise I'll do everything I can to make sure we both walk away from this. Kiona nodded, released his hand, started gathering what little she'd need: her knife, a length of rope, a dark blanket to cover her lighter clothing. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, they prepared to do something either brave or foolish, maybe both. But as Dalton watched Kiona move with quiet efficiency around the camp, he realized something. For the first time since his sister died, he felt like he was doing something that mattered, not running from guilt, not hiding from responsibility, but standing up and fighting for someone who deserved to be fought for, even if it cost him everything. The moon was a thin slice of silver when they reached the northern edge of Garrett's property. Curtis waited in the shadows where he'd promised, his face pale in the darkness. 3 horses stood nearby, already saddled. Smart. If things went wrong, they'd need to run fast. Guards just changed, Curtis whispered. 2 at the main gate, 1 circling the corral. There's a 4th inside the house with Garrett. That's his nephew, Marvin. Doesn't leave Garrett's side. Kiona studied the layout from their position behind a rocky outcrop. The main house sat in the center of cleared land, making direct approach impossible without being seen. But she'd told Dalton the truth. She knew this territory, knew the small creek that ran behind the property, cutting through a shallow ravine that provided cover almost to the back wall. The office is on the ground floor, Curtis said. Western corner. Window faces the creek, but it'll be locked. Windows can be opened. Kiona looked at Dalton. You stay here with Curtis. If we're not back in 20 minutes, ride for town. Get the marshal. Not a chance. Dalton checked his revolver, making sure it moved smoothly in its holster. We go together or not at all. You'll slow me down. Maybe. But if you get caught, I can create a distraction. Draw them away. He met her eyes steadily. We're doing this together. Kiona wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was her burden to carry alone, like she'd carried everything alone for 3 years. But the determined set of his jaw told her arguing would waste precious time. Fine. Stay close and stay quiet. She turned to Curtis. If shooting starts, you run. Don't try to help. Just get to the marshal and tell him everything. Curtis nodded, looking relieved to have a role that didn't involve getting closer to danger. They moved through the darkness like shadows. Kiona led, her feet finding solid ground instinctively, avoiding loose stones and dry brush that would make noise. Dalton followed, trying to match her movements. He was better than she'd expected for someone who probably spent most of his time on horseback, rather than moving through difficult terrain on foot. The creek bed was dry this time of year, leaving a channel of smooth stones and hard-packed earth. They moved along it quickly, the high banks on either side hiding them from view. Kiona's heart hammered against her ribs. Not from fear exactly, from the strange sensation of having someone at her back, of not being alone. They reached the point closest to the house. Kiona raised her hand, signaling Dalton to stop. Through the gap in the bank, she could see the guard circling the corral. He carried a rifle loosely, clearly not expecting trouble. Why would he? Nobody had ever challenged Garrett Stone before. They waited until the guard passed, his footsteps crunching on gravel, then disappeared around the far side of the building. Kiona counted to 10, then moved. She scrambled up the bank, Dalton right behind her. They crossed the open ground in a sprint that felt like it lasted forever, but probably took only seconds. The office window was exactly where Curtis said it would be. Kiona pulled her knife and worked the blade carefully into the gap between the window frame and sill. Old wood, swollen from moisture, the kind that warped and left gaps. After a moment, she felt the latch give way. The window opened with a soft creak that sounded deafening in the quiet night. They both froze, listening. No shouts, no running footsteps, just the distant sound of the guard's boots and the soft rustle of wind through dry grass. Dalton helped her through the window first, then climbed in after her. The office smelled of leather and tobacco smoke. Moonlight filtered through the window, providing just enough light to see the desk, the chairs, the shelves lined with books and papers. The ledger, Dalton whispered. What does it look like? Curtis said it has a brown leather cover. Garrett keeps it locked in the desk drawer. They moved to the desk. Dalton tried the drawer. Locked, as expected. He pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket, the kind used to clean rifles, and worked it into the lock. Kiona watched the door, every muscle tense, ready to fight or flee. The lock clicked. Dalton pulled the drawer open slowly, minimizing sound. Inside, among various papers and a small cash box, sat a leather-bound ledger. He lifted it out carefully and opened to a random page. Even in the dim light, the numbers told a clear story. Columns marked actual versus reported, debts listed in red, sales recorded that didn't match the public accounts, evidence of a man drowning in financial ruin and willing to do anything to hide it. This is it, Dalton breathed. This proves everything. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. They both froze. Footsteps approached the office door. Heavy, deliberate. Someone knew they were here. The door swung open. Lamplight flooded the room. Garrett stood in the doorway, his nephew Marvin beside him holding a rifle. Garrett's face showed no surprise, only cold satisfaction. I wondered how long it would take you to try something this stupid, Garrett said. He stepped into the room, Marvin following, the rifle never wavering from its aim at Dalton's chest. Curtis came running to warn me the moment you left him. Told me everything. The boy might be weak, but at least he knows where his loyalty lies. Kiona felt the words like a physical blow. Curtis had betrayed them, led them straight into a trap. She glanced at Dalton, saw the same realization settling over his features. You're holding my property, Garrett said, nodding toward the ledger in Dalton's hands. That's theft, and you broke into my home. That's trespassing. His smile was cold. Marvin, I think we have every right to defend ourselves. Don't you? Marvin's finger moved to the trigger, the rifle barrel steady, aimed at Dalton's heart. Wait. Kiona stepped forward, placing herself between Dalton and the gun. Let him go. This was my idea. My plan. He just followed me here. Kiona, don't, Dalton started. No, she cut him off. You've done enough. You tried to help, but this is where it ends. Let him leave. Keep me if you need someone to blame. Garrett laughed. How noble. The beast has a heart after all. He moved closer, studying her with the kind of look usually reserved for livestock at auction. You know what? You're right. This is where it ends. But not the way you think. Garrett pulled a revolver from his belt. Here's what's going to happen. You two are going to have a tragic accident. Out in those hills where the beast lives. A struggle. Maybe she attacked you, stranger. Maybe you fought back. Either way, when they find your bodies tomorrow, it'll be clear what happened. Self-defense. Justified. People saw us together in town, Dalton said. His hand inched toward his own weapon. They'll know. They'll know an outsider tried to defend a thief and paid the price. Garrett cocked the hammer on his revolver. Marvin, if either of them moves, shoot. But Garrett had made a mistake. He'd focused on Dalton as the primary threat, positioned himself to keep the man covered. That left Kiona, the woman he'd called a beast, slightly to the side, underestimated. She moved fast, not toward Garrett, but toward the lamp Marvin had set on the desk. Her hand connected with it, knocking it sideways. It fell, oil spilling across the wooden surface, flames catching instantly. Fire spread across the desk in a wave of heat and light. Marvin jerked backward, startled. The rifle barrel swung away from Dalton for just a moment. That was all the opening Dalton needed. He lunged forward, grabbing the rifle barrel and pushing it upward. It discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. Kiona threw herself at Garrett. He was bigger, stronger, but she had desperation and 3 years of survival instinct driving her. They hit the floor together, his revolver skittering away across the wood. She drove her knee into his stomach, heard the breath leave him in a grunt. Dalton wrestled with Marvin for control of the rifle. They crashed into the bookshelf, sending papers and ledgers cascading down. The fire on the desk was spreading, eating through papers, reaching for the curtains. Stop! A voice from the doorway. Everyone froze. The marshal stood there, revolver drawn, Curtis behind him looking terrified. Everyone on the ground. Now, for a moment, nobody moved. Then Dalton slowly released the rifle and raised his hands. Marvin backed away, breathing hard. Kiona climbed off Garrett, who lay gasping on the floor. Marshal Hayes. Garrett found his voice, though it came out strained. Thank goodness you're here. These two broke into my home, tried to rob me. That's not what Curtis told me. The marshal's revolver stayed level, not aimed at anyone specifically, but ready to target whoever moved wrong. Said you've been running a scheme, stealing your own cattle to collect insurance money, setting up this woman to take the blame. Curtis is a confused boy. He doesn't know what he's saying. Maybe. The marshal's eyes were hard. But that ledger there tells a different story, the one that's about to catch fire. Dalton grabbed the ledger from where it had fallen, stamping out the flames that were beginning to catch at its edges. He handed it to the marshal. It's all in here. Every lie. Every debt. Proof he moved his own cattle and blamed Kiona. Marshal Hayes flipped through the pages quickly, his expression darkening with each entry he scanned. Behind him, shouts echoed from outside. The guards had noticed the fire, were coming to investigate. Curtis, the marshal said without looking away from Garrett, go tell those men to bring water. We need to contain this fire before it spreads. Curtis disappeared. Sounds of commotion grew outside as the guards mobilized to fight the flames. You can't trust that book, Garrett said. He'd managed to sit up, one hand pressed against his ribs where Kiona had kneed him. It's personal, private, not meant for public eyes. Then you shouldn't have kept such detailed records of your crimes. The marshal closed the ledger. Garrett Stone, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted violence. Marvin, you too. This is ridiculous. Garrett's voice rose. I'm a respected member of this community. I built half this town. You're going to believe some savage and a drifter over me? I'm going to believe evidence. The marshal gestured toward the door. Now move, both of you. Marvin went without protest, his face ashen, but Garrett wasn't finished. As he stood, his hand darted toward the revolver he'd dropped earlier. His fingers closed around the grip. Kiona saw it first, saw the rage in his eyes, the desperation of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. She moved without thinking, throwing herself sideways into Dalton, pushing him out of the line of fire just as Garrett's revolver came up. The shot rang out. Kiona felt something white-hot tear across her shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the wall and slid down, hand coming up to touch the wound. Blood, but not as much as she'd expected. The bullet had grazed her, cutting a furrow through flesh but missing anything vital. The marshal's revolver spoke twice. Garrett dropped, the weapon falling from his hand. He clutched his leg, screaming. The marshal had aimed low deliberately. Not a killing shot, just disabling. That's enough. The marshal's voice cut through the chaos. One more move from anyone and the next bullet goes center mass. Nobody moved. The fire on the desk had been mostly contained by the lack of additional fuel, burning itself out. Smoke filled the room, acrid and thick. Outside, the guards arrived with buckets of water, pushing through the door to douse what remained of the flames. Dalton was beside Kiona immediately, hands gentle as he examined her shoulder. "You're hit." "I'm fine." But her voice shook slightly. The reality of what had almost happened, what she'd prevented, was settling over her. "You? Alive because of you." His hands trembled as he pressed his bandana against her wound, applying pressure. "That was the second time today you've put yourself between me and danger. You did the same for me first." Their eyes met. In the smoky chaos, with blood on her shoulder and the smell of burned wood in the air, something passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. The acknowledgement that they'd saved each other in ways that went beyond just physical protection. The marshal was securing Garrett's hands with rope, Marvin already restrained. "We'll need statements from both of you. And Curtis, this is going to be complicated." "Complicated how?" Dalton asked, still holding pressure on Kiona's wound. "Because Garrett's right about one thing. He did build a lot of this town. Has a lot of friends. Some won't want to believe what he's done." The marshal looked at Kiona. "They'll want to blame you still. Old prejudices die hard. Let them blame me." Kiona's voice was steady despite the pain. "I'm used to it. At least now we have proof of the truth." "Proof helps," the marshal said. "But truth and justice aren't always the same thing." The town gathered in the square the next morning. The same square where they'd watched Kiona sit with a sack over her head just one day ago. But this time, the marshal stood on the wooden platform with the ledger open in his hands, reading the evidence aloud for everyone to hear. Garrett Stone sat on a bench nearby, leg bandaged, hands bound. His nephew Marvin sat beside him, head down. Neither man looked at the crowd. Neither tried to defend themselves anymore. The numbers spoke for themselves. Fraud, theft, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Kiona stood at the edge of the gathering, Dalton beside her. His hand rested lightly on her good shoulder, the one that wasn't bandaged beneath her shirt. She'd refused to let the doctor in town touch her, didn't trust any of them yet. So Dalton had cleaned and dressed the wound himself by lamplight, his hands gentle and careful. She'd never let anyone care for her like that. Not in 3 years. Maybe not ever. People kept glancing at her, some with shame, some with curiosity, a few with something that might have been the beginning of respect. Jenkins approached slowly, hat in his hands. He stopped a few feet away, looking uncomfortable. "Miss," he said, then cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology. We all do. What we did yesterday, what we let happen, there's no excuse for it." Kiona studied him, saw genuine remorse in his weathered face. "You watched them put a sack over my head and tie me up, brought your friends to see the show." Jenkins flinched. "Yes, ma'am, we did, and I'll carry that shame until I die. But if you're willing, I'd like to try to make it right. Got a section of land that needs working. Could use someone who knows how to survive in rough country. Pays fair. Cabin comes with it. I don't need your charity. It's not charity. It's work. Honest work for honest pay." Jenkins met her eyes. "And maybe a chance for all of us to be better than we were yesterday." Before Kiona could respond, Curtis pushed through the crowd. His face was bruised. Garrett had beaten him badly when he'd tried to back out of the trap. But Curtis had gone to the marshal anyway, had told the truth despite knowing what it might cost him. "I'm sorry," Curtis said. His voice cracked. "I was scared. Garrett said he'd ruin my family if I didn't help. But that doesn't excuse what I almost did. You both could have died because of me." Dalton stepped forward, extended his hand. "You made the right choice when it mattered. That's what counts." Curtis took the hand, shaking it firmly. "Thank you, both of you." The marshal finished reading. The crowd dispersed slowly, talking among themselves. Justice had been served, but it left a bitter taste. Their town's founder revealed as a fraud, their own cruelty exposed. As the square emptied, Dalton turned to Kiona. "What are you going to do now?" She looked at the hills in the distance. The place she'd hidden for 3 years. Then at the town around them. Still hostile in some ways, but maybe changing. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to run. Go somewhere nobody knows my name or my face. And the other part? The other part thinks maybe it's time to stop hiding. She touched her shoulder where the bullet had grazed. You could have let me take that bullet. Could have stepped aside and saved yourself, but you stayed, even knowing what it might cost. You did the same for me, twice. That's different. How? Kiona struggled to find words. Because you saw me, not the beast they created, not the thing in the sack. You saw me when nobody else could. Dalton's hand found hers. I saw someone worth seeing, someone worth fighting for, someone with more courage and heart than anyone else in this whole territory. She looked down at their joined hands, his skin against hers. Connection she'd denied herself for so long. I don't know how to do this. Trust someone. Let someone in. Neither do I. Dalton smiled slightly. We could figure it out together, if you want. Kiona thought about the empty hills, the lonely camp, the years of isolation that had kept her safe, but also kept her from living. Then she thought about Dalton kneeling beside her in the dust, removing the sack, seeing her humanity when the world saw only a beast. Stay, she said. Work that land Jenkins mentioned with me. I know these hills. Know what grows here, what survives. She squeezed his hand. I could teach you. And you could teach me what? How to stop running from the past. How to build something new. Dalton pulled her closer. How to have hope again. They stood there in the emptying square. Two people who'd survived their own kinds of loss. Who'd found each other in the worst moment and chosen to fight instead of flee. The town would talk. Some would never accept them. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the choice they were making now. To stay. To build. To trust that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. Dalton touched the place on her shoulder where his bandana still bound her wound. They called you a beast, put you in a sack to hide your face. But when I looked inside, all I found was someone with more heart than all of them combined. Kiona leaned into him slightly, let herself feel the warmth of another person for the first time in years. Then I guess you found what you were looking for. I think we both did. They walked toward the edge of town together, toward Jenkins's land, toward a cabin that could become a home. The past would always be there, the losses, the pain, the scars. But maybe, just maybe, the future could be different. And for the first time since she'd buried her family by that river, Kiona allowed herself to believe it. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the untamed frontier, where courage and redemption collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us. He hid an Apache spy in his cellar. Next day, blinding lights flashed from every mountaintop. Matthias Cord had lived through ambushes, through winters that froze men in their bedrolls, through fevers that turned whole camps into graveyards. But he had never seen anything like what surrounded his ranch that morning. Every peak, every ridge, every high point in the valley covered in flashing points of light. Thousands of them, pulsing in coordinated patterns that made his chest tighten. The Apache had activated something he thought existed only in military reports. And somehow, his decision from the night before had triggered it all. The blood trail had appeared just after sunset. Matthias had been checking the fence line when he spotted it dark droplets in the dust, leading toward the old storage shed behind his house. His hand had gone to the rifle on his shoulder before his mind fully processed what he was seeing. Someone wounded. Someone trying to hide. He should have ridden straight to the settlement. Should have alerted the militia patrol that had passed through earlier, asking about Apache scouts in the area. Should have done anything except what he did next. Instead, Matthias had followed the blood trail to the shed, pushed open the door, and found a man pressed against the back wall. Young Apache warrior, maybe 30 years old, with a bullet wound in his thigh and eyes that held no fearly calculation. The man's hand rested on something small and reflective tucked into his belt. A mirror. Not just any mirror, but the kind Matthias had seen military scouts carry. The kind used for long-distance signaling. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then the Apache said something in his own language, a phrase Matthias understood from his years as an army tracker. You were at Canyon de Chelly. Matthias felt something cold settle in his gut. That had been 8 years ago. The campaign he'd quit the army over. The one that still woke him at night. He'd made his choice in that moment. Not out of courage or principle, but because the alternative, turning this man over to the militia, would have meant watching another execution. He'd carried the wounded Apache to his cellar, given him water, bandaged the leg with strips of old cloth. The man had watched him work in silence, occasionally glancing at the small mirror he kept clutched in his hand like it was worth more than his life. "They will come looking," the Apache had said in broken English. "I know. Why help me?" Matthias hadn't answered. He'd simply locked the cellar door from the outside and returned to his house, listening to the sounds of riders passing on the distant road. The militia, still searching. He'd barely slept. Every sound made him reach for his rifle. Every creak of the house settling made his heart race. But he'd kept the secret through the night. Now, standing in his doorway with the morning sun just clearing the eastern peaks, Matthias stared at the impossible sight before him. The mountains were alive with light, flashing, pulsing, sending patterns he couldn't read but understood on an instinctive level. This was communication. This was coordination. This was the Apache Nation talking to itself. And every signal pointed back toward his ranch, sitting alone in the middle of the valley. Whatever he'd hidden in his cellar last night wasn't just a wounded scout. The man was important enough to activate a network that stretched across the entire territory. Important enough that dozens, maybe hundreds of Apache warriors were now positioned on every high point, sending messages with mirrors and sunlight. Matthias felt the weight of what he'd done settle on his shoulders. The cellar door was still locked. The Apache was still down there. And now, somehow, the entire valley knew. He didn't know if the lights were a warning, a threat, or something else entirely. But as he watched another sequence flash across the northern ridge, coordinated and precise, one thought cut through everything else. Whatever came next, there was no going back. Matthias forced himself to move. Standing in the doorway staring at the mountains wouldn't change anything. He walked to the water pump behind the house, working the handle with mechanical precision while his mind raced. The flashing lights continued their patterned short bursts, long flashes, pauses. He recognized it as a form of code, similar to what the army had used during campaigns. But the scale was staggering. This wasn't a few scouts signaling. This was an entire network spanning the territory. The sound of horses pulled him from his thoughts. 3 riders coming up the road from the settlement. Matthias recognized the lead horse before he saw the rider's face Marcus Webb, the man who'd organized the militia patrol. The same man who'd stopped at Matthias's ranch yesterday asking about Apache movement in the area. Matthias set down the water bucket and walked toward the fence line, keeping his movements casual. Every instinct screamed at him to check the cellar door, to make sure it was still locked, to verify the Apache was quiet. He did none of those things. Instead, he leaned against the fence post like a man with nothing to hide. Matthias. Webb pulled his horse to a stop, the animal's breath coming hard from the ride. The 2 men behind him looked nervous, their hands resting near their rifles. "You see what's happening on the ridges? Hard to miss. That's Apache signaling, military style, using mirrors to send messages." Webb's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there yesterday. "Means they're coordinating something, probably planning to hit the settlements." Matthias kept his face neutral. "Or maybe they're just talking to each other." "Apache don't just talk, Cord. Not like this. Not unless something big is happening." Webb leaned forward in his saddle. "We're checking every ranch, every cabin in the valley, making sure nobody's harboring scouts or giving them supplies. You understand?" It wasn't a question. Matthias nodded slowly, his pulse steady despite the weight of the lie he was about to tell. "Haven't seen any Apache. Just like I told you yesterday." One of the other riders spoke up. "Those signals started this morning, right after dawn. You notice anything unusual last night? Fires on the ridges? Movement near your property?" "I sleep light," Matthias said. "Would have heard something." Webb studied him for a long moment. The flashing lights on the mountains continued their relentless patterns, visible even in the bright morning sun. Finally, Webb straightened in his saddle. "We're heading up to check the northern ranches. If you see anything at all, you ride to the settlement. Don't try to handle it yourself." "Understood." The 3 men turned their horses and rode back toward the road. Matthias watched them until they disappeared around the bend, then waited another full minute before moving. The lights on the mountains flashed in sequences that seemed to follow the riders' progress, as if the Apache network was tracking their movement through the valley. He walked to the cellar door at the side of the house. The lock was still in place. He pulled it free and descended the narrow stairs, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The Apache sat exactly where Matthias had left him, back against the stone wall, wounded leg stretched out. The small mirror lay beside him on the dirt floor, catching fragments of light from the gap under the door. "Your people activated the network," Matthias said. "The whole valley can see the signals." The Apache's expression didn't change. "They know I am here." "How?" "I didn't signal. Nobody saw me bring you down here. I was supposed to reach the northern rendezvous by sunset yesterday." The man touched the mirror with careful fingers. "When I did not arrive, when I did not send confirmation, they began searching. The signals are not for attack. They are looking for me." Matthias felt something cold settle in his chest. "What are you carrying that's worth this much trouble?" The Apache reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch, no bigger than a man's palm. He didn't open it. "Terms. For a council meeting. Between my people and the territorial governor. First time in 3 years. Peace terms. Possibility of peace terms." The Apache's eyes held Matthias's gaze. "If I do not deliver these by tomorrow sunset, the meeting will not happen. The chiefs will see it as betrayal, as trap." The flashing lights on the mountains suddenly made terrible sense. This wasn't preparation for war. This was a desperate search for a messenger who carried the only chance to stop one. And Matthias had that messenger locked in his cellar, while militia patrols scoured the valley looking for Apache to kill. He turned toward the stairs, then stopped. "What's your name?" "Neshoba." Matthias nodded once and climbed back up, closing the cellar door behind him. He stood in the bright sunlight, watching the lights flash their patterns across the peaks. Somewhere out there, Apache warriors waited for a signal that their messenger was safe. And somewhere out there, militia riders searched for the exact same man, planning to hang him the moment they found him. Matthias had made his choice last night when he pulled a wounded enemy into his home. Now, he had to live with where that choice led. The question was whether he'd live through it at all. Matthias spent the next 2 hours working around the ranch like it was any other day. He repaired a section of fence near the corral, checking each post with deliberate focus. He hauled water for the 3 horses he kept, measuring out feed with steady hands. Normal tasks, normal rhythms. The kind of routine that wouldn't draw attention if anyone happened to ride past. But his eyes kept returning to the mountains. The signals had changed. Instead of the frantic patterns from earlier, they'd settled into slower, more methodical sequences, like someone searching methodically instead of desperately. The Apache network was adjusting its approach. He was carrying tools back to the shed when he noticed the dust cloud on the western road. Single rider moving fast. Matthias set down the tools and walked to the front of his property, recognizing the horse before he saw the face. Sarah Brennan, who ran the trading post in the settlement. She pulled up hard, her mare's flanks dark with sweat. "Marcus Webb sent word," she said, breathless. "They found Apache sign up near the northern pass. Fresh tracks, maybe 6 hours old. They're organizing a larger patrol everyman who can ride. They want you with them." Matthias had known this was coming. Webb always called on him for tracking work, counting on his years with the army. "When?" "Noon. Meeting at the crossroads." Sarah glanced at the mountains, at the still flashing lights. "Matthias, they're saying this is serious. That the Apache are planning something coordinated. Webb thinks there might be a war party gathering." "Could be." She studied him with sharp eyes. Sarah had known him for 5 years, long enough to read his moods. "You planning to ride with them?" "Haven't decided. Webb said if you don't come, he'll remember it. You know how he gets." She paused, then added more quietly, "He's already talking about checking houses more thoroughly. Says someone in the valley might be helping the Apache, hiding scouts or passing information." Matthias felt the weight of her words. Webb wasn't just organizing a patrol. He was building toward something uglier: suspicion, accusations, the kind of fear that turned neighbors into informants. "I'll think about it." Sarah nodded and turned her horse, then looked back. "Whatever you're involved in, Matthias, be careful. These aren't normal times." He watched her ride away, then returned to the cellar. Neshoba was sitting up now, testing weight on his wounded leg. The bandage Matthias had applied was dark with old blood, but the bleeding had stopped. "They found your tracks," Matthias said. "They're organizing a bigger search. They want me to help track you down." Neshoba's face remained impassive. "Will you? If I don't go, they'll know something's wrong. If I do go, I lead them away from here, but I can't control what happens next." "The signals have changed pattern," Neshoba said. My people know the militia is searching. They are adjusting the network to avoid detection while maintaining the search grid. How does it work? The mirror system. Neshoba picked up the small mirror, turning it to catch the dim light from above. Heliograph. Army taught us during the treaty years before the wars started again. We improved it. Each station can relay messages to the next. One signal from the southern ridge can reach the northern territory in less than an hour. Faster than any horse. And they're all looking for you. Not just looking, coordinating. If I do not signal my position soon, they will assume I am captured. They will assume the peace terms are lost. The chiefs will interpret it as betrayal, that the territorial governor set a trap to capture their messenger. Neshoba met his eyes. The signals you see now are not just search patterns. They are also preparation. If I am not delivered to the rendezvous by tomorrow sunset, those same signals will coordinate an attack on every settlement in the valley. The casual way he said it made it more chilling. This wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The consequences were already in motion, written in flashes of light across the mountains. You need to signal them, Matthias said. Tell them you're safe. I cannot. If I signal from your property, the militia will see it. They will know exactly where to look. They will come here and find me within the hour. And they will hang you beside me for harboring an enemy. Neshoba held up the mirror. The only safe signal point is the northern rendezvous location 15 miles from here, up in the high country where the peaks meet. I must be there in person to send the confirmation signal. You can't ride 15 miles with that leg. Then we have a problem. Matthias heard horses again, multiple riders this time, coming from the east. He climbed the stairs quickly, closing the cellar door just as 4 militia members rode into view. Webb was with them, along with 3 men Matthias recognized from the settlement. They didn't stop at the fence line. They rode straight into his property, spreading out in a loose formation. Webb dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. Change of plans, Cord. We're checking every structure in the valley. Barns, cellars, storage sheds. Every place a man could hide. His eyes moved past Matthias toward the house. You understand, this isn't personal. It's necessary. Matthias stood perfectly still, calculating distances and angles. 4 armed men against 1. The cellar door was visible from where Webb stood. Locked. But that wouldn't stop them if they decided to search it. Of course, Matthias said. Where do you want to start? Matthias led them to the barn first. The decision was calculated, give them something to search, something that would take time and satisfy their need to be thorough. He swung open the wide doors, letting sunlight flood the interior. 3 horses stood in their stalls, unbothered by the intrusion. Hay bales stacked against the back wall, tools hanging from hooks. Nothing hidden, nothing suspicious. Webb walked through slowly, checking behind every stack, peering into the feed bins. The other men spread out, one climbing to the loft to search the upper level. Matthias stood near the door, arms crossed, projecting the calm of a man with nothing to hide. Inside, his mind raced through options. The cellar was next. It had to be. There was no other significant structure on the property to delay them with. Clean, one of the men called down from the loft. Webb nodded and moved back outside. His eyes went directly to the house, then shifted to the small wooden door set into the stone foundation, the cellar entrance. Matthias felt his pulse quicken but kept his breathing steady. That the cellar? Webb asked. Storage. Keeps things cool in summer. Let's see it. Matthias pulled the key from his pocket, making a show of fumbling with it slightly. Buying seconds. As he unlocked the door, he listened for any sound from below. Movement, breathing, anything that would give Neshoba away. Nothing. The Apache was silent as stone. He pulled the door open and started down the stairs. Webb followed immediately, with 2 of his men behind him. The cellar was small, maybe 12 feet across, with stone walls that kept it perpetually cool. Shelves lined one wall, holding preserves and dried goods. A few barrels in the corner, and against the far wall in the deepest shadow where the light from above barely reached, Neshoba sat perfectly motionless. Matthias's heart slammed against his ribs, but Webb was looking at the shelves, at the barrels, at everything except the darkest corner where a wounded Apache warrior remained frozen in place. One of the other men walked past within 3 feet of Neshoba, his attention on checking behind the barrels. Not much down here, Webb said. You need to stock up before winter. Been meaning to. Webb took one more look around, his eyes sweeping across the space. For one terrible moment, his gaze passed directly over the corner where Neshoba sat. but the shadows held. The Apache's dark clothing blended into the stone, and Webb's eyes, adjusted to the bright sunlight outside, couldn't pick out the human shape in the darkness. All right, let's check the shed. Matthias climbed the stairs behind them, his legs weak with relief. He pulled the cellar door closed and locked it, following the men toward the storage shed on the far side of the property. Behind him, he heard the faintest scrape of movement from the cellar Neshoba, finally allowing himself to breathe. The shed search was quick, just tools and equipment, nothing that could hide a man. Webb seemed satisfied, but there was still tension in his shoulders. The signals are getting more frequent, he said, pointing toward the mountains. See that pattern? 3 short flashes, 1 long repeat. That's not random. That's coordinated communication. Matthias looked up at the ridges. Webb was right. The pattern had changed again, becoming more urgent, more insistent. We're heading to the northern ranches next, Webb continued. Then we're establishing watch posts on the high ground. If the Apache are planning something, we'll see them coming. He mounted his horse, the other men following suit. You still haven't said if you're riding with us. I'll stay here. Keep watch on my property. Webb's jaw tightened. Your choice. But remember what I said, if we find out someone's been helping them, harboring scouts, that person won't see a trial. The valley takes care of traitors its own way. The 4 riders left at a gallop, heading north along the road. Matthias waited until they were completely out of sight before returning to the cellar. He unlocked the door and descended quickly. Neshoba was standing now, leaning heavily against the wall. His face was covered in sweat despite the cool air. That was close. Too close. They'll be back. Webb's suspicious, he just can't prove anything yet. Matthias moved to the shelves, pulling down a canteen of water. You said you need to reach the northern rendezvous by tomorrow sunset. That's the high country. 15 miles through rough terrain. You can't walk it with that leg, and you definitely can't ride. Then I will not make it. The peace terms will not be delivered, and the war will begin. Matthias handed him the canteen. There's another option. I deliver the terms for you. Neshoba stared at him. The chiefs will not accept terms from a white man, especially not from a former soldier. They will think it is a trick. Then you teach me the signal, the confirmation pattern your people are waiting for. I ride to the rendezvous point. I send the signal from there. Your network sees it, knows you're safe, and they send someone to meet me. I hand over the leather pouch with the terms. They deliver it to wherever it needs to go. If the militia catches you carrying Apache peace terms, they will hang you. If I do nothing, people on both sides die. I've seen enough of that. Matthias met the Apache's eyes. I walked away from the army because of what we did at Canyon de Chelly, because I couldn't stomach any more massacres. I'm not walking away from this. Neshoba was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached for the small mirror, turning it in his hands. The signal pattern is complex. 3 sequences, repeated twice. If you make a mistake, if you send the wrong pattern, they will think it is a trap. Then teach me. We have until tomorrow sunset. Outside, the flashing lights on the mountains continued their relentless patterns. Matthias didn't know if what he was planning would work, but he knew with absolute certainty that doing nothing would lead to disaster. For Neshoba, for the settlements, for everyone caught between 2 sides that had forgotten how to stop fighting. He just had to get through one more day without being discovered. One more day to learn a signal that might prevent a war. And then a 15-mile ride into country where either side might kill him on sight. They worked through the afternoon in the cellar, with only the thin strip of light from the gap under the door to illuminate the space. Neshoba held the mirror at different angles, showing Matthias how to catch the sun, how to control the flash with precise movements. The heliograph signal wasn't just random flashing. It was a language of duration and repetition. 3 short bursts, Neshoba demonstrated, tilting the mirror in quick succession. That means messenger. Then 1 long flash safe. Then 2 short, pause. 3 short confirmation of peace terms. The entire sequence must be repeated twice without error. Matthias practiced with a piece of polished metal he'd brought from his tools, mimicking the movements. His hands were steady, but the precision required was harder than it looked. Too fast and the signals blurred together. Too slow, and they lost meaning. If you send it wrong, Neshoba said, they will think the militia forced you to signal, that you are bait for a trap. They will send warriors to kill you before you can lead soldiers to their positions. Understood. They practiced until Matthias could execute the pattern without thinking, his hands moving through the sequence automatically. Short, 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 long, short, short, pause, short, 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 repeat. Each flash had to be precise, measured against the count in his head. You will need to reach the high pass by midday tomorrow, Neshoba said. The sun must be at the right angle for the signal to carry to the relay stations. Too early, and the light is too weak. Too late, and the shadows from the peaks will block your signal. Matthias nodded, calculating the route in his mind. The northern high country was difficult terrain, narrow paths, loose rock, exposed ridges where a man and horse would be visible for miles. If Webb's patrols were watching the high ground, there would be no way to avoid them. There is another problem, Neshoba added. The leather pouch. If you are stopped by militia and they search you, I'll hide it. There are ways to carry things a search won't find. A sound from above made them both freeze. Footsteps on the ground outside the cellar. Matthias moved to the stairs, listening. One person, moving quickly. He recognized the patterned Sarah from the trading post. She'd ridden here earlier, which meant something had changed. He climbed up and opened the door just enough to see out. Sarah was standing near her horse, looking toward the mountains. When she saw him, she walked over quickly. Webb found Apache tracks leading toward the eastern ridge, she said, keeping her voice low. Fresh ones, maybe 2 hours old. He's convinced there's a war party gathering in the high country. They're setting up armed watch posts at every pass leading north, starting tonight. Matthias felt the plan crumbling. Armed watch posts meant he couldn't reach the rendezvous point without being seen and questioned. And if they searched him, found the peace terms. There's more, Sarah continued. Webb's talking about burning any ranch or cabin that might be sheltering scouts. He's working people into a panic, saying the Apache signals mean an attack is coming. Some of the men are already talking about riding into the hills and hitting the first Apache camp they find. This was exactly what Neshoba had warned about. Fear escalating into violence. Both sides preparing for war because they couldn't see the peace terms that might prevent it. When do they set up the watch posts? Sunset. Webb wants them established before dark. Sarah studied his face. Matthias, whatever you're thinking about doing, don't. This valley is about to explode. The smart thing is to stay here, keep your head down, and wait for it to pass. What if it doesn't pass? What if it just keeps getting worse? She didn't have an answer for that. After a moment, she mounted her horse and rode back toward the settlement. Matthias watched her go, then returned to the cellar. They're setting up watch posts at the passes, he told Neshoba. Starting tonight. I won't be able to get through once they're established. Then you must leave now, before sunset. In daylight, I'll be visible the entire ride. Yes, but if you wait, there will be no path at all. Neshoba pulled the leather pouch from his shirt and held it out. The peace terms are written in English and Apache. They outline boundaries, trade agreements, and guarantees of safe passage. 3 chiefs signed them. The territorial governor agreed to meet if we could deliver them by tomorrow's sunset. If we fail, if these terms do not reach the governor, the chiefs will see it as proof that the whites never wanted peace, that every offer has been a trap. Matthias took the pouch. It weighed almost nothing, but holding it felt like carrying something massive. What happens to you while I'm gone? I stay here. If you succeed, you can signal me from the high pass using the mirror. I will see it and know it is safe to move. If you fail, Neshoba shrugged, it will not matter what happens to me. Matthias climbed the stairs and walked to the small corral where his horses stood. He chose the roan mare, not the fastest, but the most sure-footed on rough terrain. As he saddled her, he watched the mountains. The flashing signals continued, now with an urgency that seemed to pulse through the afternoon air. The Apache network knew time was running out. He secured supplies to the saddle water, dried meat, his rifle, the leather pouch with the peace terms he tucked inside his shirt, against his skin where no casual search would find it. The polished metal that would serve as his signal mirror went into his saddlebag. The sun was already past its peak, sliding toward the western horizon. He had maybe 4 hours of good daylight left, 4 hours to cover 15 miles of difficult country, avoid militia patrols, and reach a rendezvous point where Apache warriors waited, not knowing if he was friend, enemy, or trap. Matthias swung into the saddle. The mare shifted beneath him, sensing the tension. On the mountains, the lights flashed their patterns, and somewhere in the valley, Webb's militia prepared for a war they thought was inevitable. He touched the leather pouch one more time, feeling its weight against his chest. Then he turned the mare toward the northern trail and rode. The northern trail climbed steadily through rough country, where the earth turned from dust to rock. Matthias kept the mare moving at a steady pace, not too fast to exhaust her, not slow enough to waste precious time. The sun beat down on his back, and every exposed ridge made him visible for miles in any direction. He'd been riding for an hour when he spotted the first patrol. 3 riders on the eastern slope, maybe half a mile away. They were heading toward the high ground, probably to establish one of Webb's watch posts. Matthias guided the mare into a narrow ravine, dismounting and pressing himself against the rock face while the patrol passed above. He could hear their voices echoing off the stone, discussing where to position themselves for the best view of the valley. When they moved on, he continued north. The terrain grew more difficult, loose shale that made the mare pick her way carefully, narrow paths with steep drops on either side. Twice more he had to stop and hide while riders passed in the distance. The valley was crawling with militia, all of them searching for Apache that they were convinced were planning an attack. The leather pouch pressed against his chest with each movement, a constant reminder of what he carried. Peace terms that could stop a war, or if discovered by the wrong people, evidence that would get him hanged as a traitor. The sun was sliding toward late afternoon when Matthias reached the approach to the high pass. Here the trail became treacherous, a narrow path carved into the mountain face, barely wide enough for a horse and rider. To his left, rock wall. To his right, a drop of several hundred feet to the valley floor below. The mare's shoes scraped against stone as they climbed higher. He was halfway up when he heard the voice. "Stop there." Matthias reined in the mare. An Apache warrior stood on an outcropping above the trail. Bow drawn with an arrow nocked and aimed directly at Matthias's chest. The man's face was painted with dark streaks across the cheeks' war markings. 2 more warriors appeared on the rocks ahead, blocking the path forward, all armed, all watching him with expressions that promised death if he made the wrong move. "I'm looking for the northern rendezvous," Matthias said in Apache, the words coming slowly but clearly. He'd learned the language during his army years, though he'd rarely spoken it since. The warrior with the bow didn't lower his weapon. "You are the one who speaks our language and kills our people." I was. I'm not anymore. "Then why do you ride into our territory? Why do you come to a place only a messenger would know?" Matthias kept his hands visible on the saddle horn, making no sudden movements. "Because your messenger couldn't come himself. He's wounded, hidden at my ranch. He taught me the signal pattern so I could deliver what he carries." "Lies. The militia patrols the valley. They search for our brother. If you found him, you would have turned him over to be killed. If I'd turned him over, I wouldn't be here, and neither would these." Matthias slowly reached into his shirt and pulled out the leather pouch, holding it up so they could see. "Peace terms. 3 chiefs signed them. Your messenger was supposed to deliver them by tomorrow sunset. If they don't reach the territorial governor by then, there's no meeting. No chance to stop what's coming." The warrior gestured with his bow. "Throw it here." "I can't. I need to send the confirmation signal first." That was the agreement. "Signal, then hand over the terms to whoever comes to collect them. You could be sent by the militia, to find our positions, to lead soldiers to this place. If I wanted to do that, I'd have brought soldiers with me." Matthias met the warrior's eyes steadily. "Your messenger is named Neshoba. He has a bullet wound in his left thigh from when the militia patrol caught him 2 nights ago. He carries a heliograph mirror, army issue, that he's been using for 3 years. He told me about Canyon de Shelley. He knows I was there, knows I walked away from the army afterward. That's why he trusted me, and that's why I'm here." The warriors exchanged glances. The one with the bow lowered it slightly, though the arrow remained nocked. "If what you say is true, send the signal. We will see if it is correct." Matthias dismounted carefully, leaving his rifle in its saddle holster. He pulled the polished metal from his saddlebag and walked to a flat section of rock where the late afternoon sun struck directly. The warriors watched him, weapons ready. One wrong move, one incorrect flash, and they'd kill him where he stood. He positioned himself, angling the metal to catch the sun. Then he began the sequence Neshoba had taught him. 3 short bursts messenger, 1 long flash safe, 2 short, pause, 3 short confirmation of peace terms. He held his breath and repeated the entire pattern, his hands moving with the precision he'd practiced in the cellar. The flashes of light shot out across the valley, bouncing from peak to peak. Within seconds, Matthias saw answering flashes from the relay stations on distant ridges. The Apache communication network was receiving his signal, verifying it, passing it along the chain. The pattern spread like wildfire across the mountains, the same blinding lights he'd seen from his ranch that morning, now responding to his message. The warrior with the bow lowered his weapon completely. The signal is correct. Neshoba taught you well. Matthias handed over the leather pouch. These need to reach the territorial governor by tomorrow sunset. That's less than a day from now. They will reach him. The warrior tucked the pouch into his belt. Our fastest riders are already moving. The meeting will happen. He looked at Matthias with something that might have been respect. You could have done nothing. You could have let our brother die and kept yourself safe. Why did you not? Matthias thought about Canyon de Celli, about the things he'd seen that made him quit the army, about all the ways violence spread when good people did nothing to stop it. Because I'm tired of burying people who didn't need to die. The warrior nodded once. Then he and the others melted back into the rocks, disappearing as silently as they'd appeared. Matthias was alone on the mountain, with the sun sinking toward the horizon and 15 miles of dangerous country between him and home. The ride back was harder than the ride up. Darkness fell quickly in the mountains, and Matthias had to trust the mare's footing on the treacherous path. He kept thinking about the Apache warriors' faces when they'd received the signal. Relief, hope, the same emotions he'd been trying to ignore in himself. He was still 2 miles from his ranch when he saw the glow on the horizon. Not the flashing signals this time, steady orange light that could only mean one thing. Fire! Matthias urged the mare faster, his chest tightening with each stride. Please let it not be his ranch. Please let Webb's paranoia not have turned into action while he was gone. But as he cleared the final ridge, he saw that the fire wasn't at his property. It was further south near the Brennan place where Sarah ran the trading post. He rode hard toward his ranch, and as he approached, he saw figures moving in the darkness near his house. Lanterns. Men on foot. His hand went to his rifle, but before he could draw it, a voice called out. Hold there. Webb stepped into the light cast by a lantern one of his men held. 5 militia members total. All armed, all positioned around Matthias's property. Webb's face was tight with anger. Where have you been, Cord? Checking my northern fence line. Thought I saw tracks earlier. In the dark? For 6 hours? Webb moved closer. Sarah Brennan's trading post was raided this afternoon. Apache warriors came down from the high country, took supplies, and left. No one was hurt, but they got what they came for: food, water, ammunition, like they were preparing for something. Matthias kept his expression neutral, but relief flooded through him. The Apache hadn't raided, they'd traded or taken what they needed for their riders to reach the governor. The peace terms were moving forward. Why are you here? Matthias asked. Because Sarah said you were acting strange earlier. Said you seemed like you were planning something. Webb's eyes narrowed. And because we found Apache tracks near your property. Recent ones leading to your cellar. The world seemed to stop. Matthias forced himself to breathe normally, to keep his hands loose on the reins. There are no Apache on my property. Then you won't mind if we look. Again. More carefully this time. The men moved toward the cellar door before Matthias could respond. He dismounted, his mind racing through options. Neshoba was still down there, wounded, unable to run or fight, and this time Webb would search every shadow, every corner. But as they reached the cellar and Webb pulled at the door, Matthias saw that the lock was broken. The door swung open to reveal empty darkness. The militia descended with lanterns raised, searching thoroughly. Matthias followed, his heart pounding. The cellar was bare. No Neshoba. No signs anyone had been there except the faint dark stain on the stone floor where the wounded man had sat. Nothing, one of the men said. Just like before. Webb stood in the middle of the cellar, turning slowly, his jaw working. I know what I saw. Those tracks led here. Maybe they were old tracks, Matthias said quietly. From days ago, you've been stirring people up, Webb, making them see threats that aren't there. The Apache signaling stopped an hour ago, Webb said, after flashing all day, then suddenly, nothing. Like they got what they wanted, like someone delivered a message for them. He stepped close to Matthias, close enough that their faces were inches apart. If I find out you've been helping them, you'll what? Burn my ranch like you're threatening to do to anyone you suspect? Turn neighbor against neighbor until there's no one left to trust? Matthias held his ground. I haven't helped anyone, Webb, but I haven't helped you either. Because what you're doing is going to start the exact war you claim to be preventing. Webb's hand moved toward his pistol, but one of his men put a hand on his shoulder. Come on, Marcus, there's nothing here. We've got other places to check. After a long moment, Webb stepped back. He looked around the cellar one more time, his frustration evident. Then he climbed the stairs, his men following. Matthias waited until they'd ridden away before allowing himself to relax. He walked the property slowly, checking every shadow, every possible hiding place. Neshoba was gone. The Apache must have sent someone to extract him while Matthias was delivering the signal. Smart. Clean. No evidence left behind except the faint bloodstain that could be explained away. On the mountains, the relay station sat dark and silent. The blinding lights that had flashed from every peak were gone. The network had shut down because it had served its purpose. The messenger was safe. The terms were delivered. Matthias looked toward the northern high country, wondering if the peace meeting would actually happen. If 3 chiefs and a territorial governor would sit down and try to stop the violence before it consumed them all. He'd done what he could. The rest was up to people with more power and less blood on their hands. He unsaddled the mare, fed her, and walked to his house. The leather pouch was gone from his shirt, delivered as promised, but he could still feel its weight, like it had left an imprint that wouldn't fade. Tomorrow he'd know if it had been enough, if one man's decision to hide an enemy had changed anything at all, or if the valley would wake to war regardless of the risks he'd taken. 3 days passed with no word from the territorial capital. Matthias worked his ranch, repaired fences, and avoided the settlement. Webb's militia maintained their watch posts on the high ground, scanning the ridges for Apache warriors that never came. The valley held its breath, waiting for violence that everyone expected, but no one could predict. On the 4th morning, a rider came from the south, official courier, wearing the territorial seal on his jacket. He stopped at every ranch and settlement, delivering the same message. The Peace Council had convened. 3 Apache chiefs and the territorial governor had met at a neutral location, with the terms Neshoba had carried serving as the foundation for negotiation. A temporary agreement had been reached, boundaries established, safe passage guaranteed, trade relations opened. It wasn't permanent peace, but it was a chance. A pause in the killing. Matthias heard the news from Sarah, who rode to his ranch that afternoon. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept since the night her trading post was raided. "They're saying an anonymous messenger delivered the peace terms," she said. Someone who knew both sides well enough to be trusted by the Apache and brave enough to risk the militia patrols. Nobody knows who it was. Webb's convinced it was one of his own men acting without orders. Maybe it was. Sarah studied him carefully. "Matthias, the bloodstain in your cellar, the broken lock, the way you rode out the day the signal stopped." She paused. "I'm not asking you to confirm anything. I'm just saying, whatever you did, it mattered. People are alive today who wouldn't have been." After she left, Matthias walked to the northern edge of his property, where he could see the high country. The relay stations sat silent, their mirrors dark. The network that had blazed with coordinated light was dormant now, its purpose fulfilled. He wondered if Neshoba had made it back to his people safely, if the wound had healed, if the man remembered the rancher who'd hidden him when logic and self-preservation demanded otherwise. 2 weeks later, a package arrived with no return marking. Inside was a small heliograph mirror, polished to perfection, and a strip of leather with Apache symbols carved into it. Matthias didn't speak the written language well enough to read the message completely, but he recognized enough to understand the meaning. Gratitude. Acknowledgement. The kind of respect that transcended the boundaries people drew between allies and enemies. He kept the mirror in a drawer in his house, wrapped in cloth where no one would find it. Some things were better left unexplained. The valley settled into an uneasy peace. Webb's militia gradually disbanded as the expected Apache attack never materialized. Trade routes opened cautiously. People who'd been preparing for war started preparing for winter instead. The change was slow, fragile, built on a foundation that could crack with a single violent incident. But it held. Matthias never spoke about what he'd done. When people asked about the day the signals flashed from every mountain, he said he'd been checking his fence line and hadn't noticed much. When Webb occasionally rode past his ranch, eyes full of suspicion, Matthias nodded and went back to work. The truth was a weight he carried alone, and he preferred it that way. Some nights he stood outside and looked at the dark mountains, remembering how they'd blazed with light when Neshoba's network activated, how thousands of points of brilliance had connected an entire nation in search of one wounded messenger, how close everything had come to falling apart, and how one decision made in a moment when compassion outweighed fear had changed the trajectory of an entire valley. He never knew for certain if the peace would last. Agreements made in council rooms were fragile things, easily broken by men who wanted violence more than safety. But he'd done what he could. He'd hidden an enemy who turned out to be carrying hope instead of weapons. He'd learned a signal pattern and ridden into dangerous country to deliver terms that others had dismissed as impossible. The morning sun rose over his ranch like it always did, warming the earth, casting shadows from the mountains where the relay stations waited in silence. Matthias fed his horses, checked his water supply, and prepared for another day of work that would keep him busy until nightfall. And in a drawer in his house, wrapped in cloth and hidden from view, a polished mirror reflected nothing but darkness, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage created light that spread farther than anyone could measure. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and impossible choices collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.